this month's meeting of the Nashville Microsoft Azure Users Group. This is our first online meeting. Hopefully it won't be the last, but we have a good crowd here tonight for the meeting. So let me move my slides. So again, what we normally do is we normally start off with a few slides about the group, especially for people who are new to the group, and then we'll go right into the presentation. So I promise you this won't take very long, okay? So anyway, our mission is pretty simple. It's all about Microsoft Azure. It's to educate our members, to provide networking opportunities for our members so we can network with each other and talk about Azure. I must admit, when we started the group, it was as a meetup group. It was to have in-person meetups so that you could talk, but we can still hopefully carry on that even though we're in an online mode. Logistics, we meet every third Thursday of the month. Normally we meet at 6 o'clock at night at Microsoft up in Nashville, but obviously, we're not doing that this month because of the COVID-19 problems that we're having. We usually start with food and networking. Unfortunately, we couldn't figure out a way to send you guys food tonight, but still have some networking capabilities. And then we normally go into a main meeting topic. One of the things we're really proud of is we have over 1,500 registered members in the group. It seems amazing for Nashville, but that's what it is, and it keeps growing all the time. We can always use some more members, so tell your friends and coworkers all about us as well. And also important, let us know what Azure topics you're interested in for future meetings, because I always like to have people who attend meetings help pick the topics. We have a board of directors. I'm the founder and president of the group. That's my night job. My day job is I'm an Azure architect with Planet Technologies here in Nashville. Got Roger Dahlman, who's a co-founder and vice president. He's an enterprise architect with Deloitte. And we've got Tim Warner, who's actually our presenter tonight. And Tim is a member of our board of directors. And he's also an Azure MVP, Pluralsight course and book author. I almost want to say when I introduce Tim that he's a man who needs no introduction because he's pretty well known. Right? And then Ukela Alred is our board member and our director of academic outreach. Ukela works with the colleges and universities in the area, helping bring in new members and students to our group. Matthew Puckett is our permanent Microsoft meeting space sponsor for the last 6 years. He's also, his day job is as a principal national cloud solutions architect with Microsoft, and he's based here in Nashville. Vaco is our permanent refreshment sponsor. Again, they've been our refreshment sponsor for 6 years, so we're pretty lucky. And that's Jack Hagler, who works for Vaco, who has been that sponsor for us. A little bit about upcoming meetings. As you probably know by now, the April 25th Global Azure event was canceled worldwide because of the pandemic, so we've canceled our version of that event as well, which is a shame. Because we've had one of those Global Azure Bootcamp events, as it was used to be called, for the last 5 years. So this is kind of a break. Hopefully it'll be rescheduled sometime in the future. I do understand that they're working on putting together an online version of that. So if that information happens soon, I'll let you know. We've got a meeting scheduled in April to replace that meeting. It's our normal monthly meeting date, and that's going to be on a topic that we'll announce soon. So if you have a topic you want to suggest, let us know, okay? And the same for future months. We really do want to give you topics that, this is really your group. We really want to give you topics that are of interest to you. Again, want to thank our sponsors, Microsoft, who's been a permanent meeting space sponsor for the last 6 years, Vaco, who's been our permanent refreshment sponsor, my company, Planet Technologies, for my time running the group, since I typically steal some time during the day for that purpose. And I see I misspelled Microsoft. I'll have to correct the slide. Okay. My company's, I'm actually streaming this through Microsoft Teams on our corporate account, so they're nice enough to let me do that. We are always looking for co-sponsors, although normally we look for co-sponsors for the in-person meetings. But if your company is interested in co-sponsoring a future meeting, get in touch with Roger Dolman, and he can hook you up with that opportunity. And with that, I want to turn things over to our presenter tonight. The topic is how to get and stay current with Microsoft Azure. And now a man who needs no introduction, Microsoft MVP, Pluralsight and book author Tim Warner. And I am required to tell you that this session is being recorded, so just be aware of that. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Tim.
Sounds good, Bill. Thanks very much. I'll turn on my camera just to say hi, and then to save bandwidth, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, I'll turn it off and then shift over to my other monitor. Yeah, so the genesis of this presentation was thinking back when I first started working with Azure intensely, maybe 3-4 years ago. And even then, I realized that this platform was moving a lot faster than what I was accustomed to previously. Previous to becoming an Azure specialist, I was more Windows Server, Active Directory, that kind of bread and butter stuff, where you expect an OS release, a major release every 3 years or so, etc. Azure, it's a totally different scene, as you know, with new products popping up every day. It seems like every time you log into the portal, there's something moved or something different or some things that say preview after it. So I amassed some resources that I think are going to be really helpful for you in terms of kind of embracing the regular rate of change in the Azure ecosystem and being more on top of it. I do want to say that, especially since joining the MVP program and getting a lot of face time with Azure engineers, that oftentimes they're surprised as well. So if you sometimes feel a bit overwhelmed by, I didn't know that Azure had this, the Microsoft folks feel that way as well, and they work for the company. So it's kind of a universal thing. All right, so let me cut the screen share, cut the webcam, and share my second monitor. Hang on just a second. I'm doing this on a Mac, and Mac OS Catalina has some additional security. I've got to quickly authenticate and give Teams permission to share my screen. So hang on just a second. By the way, any questions that come up, you could go about it in a couple different ways. You could put your question in the chat, and the chat generally goes by too quickly for me while I'm teaching. But Bill, if you would please let me know if any questions come up in the chat, just read them out. The other thing you could do is unmute yourself and just ask your questions audibly. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, let's do the latter in case, unless it gets unruly, okay?
Okay, sure. All right, let me pick my monitor here. And hopefully, are you seeing how to get and remain current with Microsoft Azure, Bill?
Yeah, yes, I am.
Okay, thanks. Good. It's kind of a weird screen arrangement you're seeing now, but I wanted to fit as much as I could on here. First of all, in the lower left corner of my screen, this is a short URL that'll take you to the document I made for you. It's timw.info/current, and I'll leave that up on the screen throughout the session. What that link will take you to is one of my GitHub repositories. And all that's in there is just this simple single markdown file, stay current with Azure. And I'm not going to just read it to you, for heaven's sake. I want to entertain you. But I want to call out the major headings, how I've divided it up here. Of course, there's some contact information up at the very top. There's my Twitter handle. If anything interesting conversationally comes out tonight that I'm not able to answer, I normally research it the next day or the day after, and I'll post any results I find on my Twitter stream there. But I start off the document here with all the links that I've amassed personally for staying on top of Azure, and I'm going to call out some of my favorites as we go through tonight. I start with just product and service availability need-to-know stuff. And then there's 3 Azure newsletters. I'd say you're fine just subscribing to any one. I subscribe to all 3, and it can be a little bit overwhelming just in terms of that volume of news coming from those 3 sources. Some community blogs that I think are particularly high impact. And then I turned my attention to skills development, especially with this quarantine situation. Seems to me it's as good a time as any to skill up. And I chose some of my favorite learning providers. Of course, my own is on there, but I'm also a huge fan, particularly of Linux Academy. But we can talk about all that stuff later. And at the end of the document, there's some hand-selected certification resources if you're interested in that. It seems to me also, nowadays you can take Microsoft certification exams from anywhere. You could do it from your home. So if you have any questions in particular about how that works, for instance, it's called online proctored exam delivery. I'm here to help. I've actually been a Microsoft certification specialist for as long as I've been in the industry, which is 21 years. Okay, so let's get into this. First of all, I decided to look at Azure Status itself. If you're familiar with the status dashboard, it's at status.azure.com. This is helping to solve the question, is this glitchy behavior I'm seeing, is this availability stuff I'm seeing in Azure something with my resources, or is it on Microsoft's side? So this is certainly a page that's worth bookmarking for everyone. And as you can see, you can change the refresh interval down here. There's a legend, the service is good. There's an informational, warning, or critical message. And then by the different geographies, you've got a run of all the different services. And what I'll normally do is just do like a Control F. And if I'm looking for like virtual desktop or something, you could just find it in the list there. Notably, some Azure resources are non-regional, and they're not tied to any particular region, like Windows Virtual Desktop is one. If you're familiar with Traffic Manager, the DNS load balancer, that's another non-regional resource. But other than that, you'll find general trends, like not every Azure service is available in every region, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is kind of kicking it old school, but you see in the upper right, how many of you are familiar with RSS? If we were together in a room, I'd ask for a show of hands. Most of these first links I give you, you can subscribe to them via RSS. And I've got actually a helpful link here, how to use RSS if you're not familiar. And so instead of having to come back to this page periodically, you could load up in, I was going to say Google Reader, but Google made a terrible decision to kill their RSS reader a couple years ago. So I use a product called Feedly, F-E-E-D-L-Y. But you can just copy and paste the RSS URL for a lot of these resources in your reader and even generate alerts so that if a particular kind of keyword announcement or some such thing pops up, you can be proactively notified. So let's see, related, a little bit of overlap. Microsoft used to call their Twitter feed Azure Status, and then there was the confusion, well, what's the difference between the Azure Status dashboard and the Azure Status Twitter feed? Now it's called the Azure Support. I find that the people who man this aren't particularly technical, so I generally advise against trying to go here for support. You're going to get something like reboot your computer. But this can be a useful place. Again, just as a quick sanity check, if you're experiencing a problem or some kind of question with your infrastructure and you're wondering if it's on Microsoft's side or yours. Next, we have service health. I'm going to actually go into the Azure portal to show this. This is something I find a lot of people aren't aware exists, but again, very useful, and it's a thoughtful feature, I think, that Microsoft added. Service health. And what the service health dashboard does, it defaults to showing you active service issues, but let me zoom out a little bit here. It's kind of crunched a bit too much. It's showing Microsoft side service issues, but the filter defaults only to the regions you're using. You see what I mean? So you can adjust on your subscription and it defaults to all of them. and it will only show the regions that you've actively got resources deployed to. I just use East US, East US 2, and one other. And then you can filter on the services. And of course, it's good to see no service issues found. If you click health history, you can look back in time. And again, you can adjust all that with the filter controls. Now, especially if you're running stuff like virtual machines, you're probably concerned about things like planned maintenance, you know, the care and feeding of servers. It's nice that you can look at scheduled maintenance that's going to affect, say, your virtual machines. Maybe there's the host that has your VM on it, or the server rack has to have some kind of replacement or whatever. It's going to experience some downtime. You're going to see that heads up here in the planned maintenance. Then health advisories, I don't know what that is actually. This is new since I've been here before, but what I just want to show as a general theme is that I find that Microsoft is pretty transparent. When they have issues on their side, you can read in pretty exhaustive detail what they find out in their root cause analysis and how they solved the problem. And you can download the issue summary. They've got a QR code where you can track that on mobile. I'm not sure how that works. I've never tried that. But again, I'm impressed with the transparency that Microsoft offers there. Okay, so you can get to service health in your dashboard just by searching for it. Another place you can find it is in the health help and support tool. If I zoom out one more level here, the question mark, the help and support center, besides this being the place where you file and follow your support tickets, you can also get to the service health dashboard as well. Another level of this kind of personalized Microsoft status information is resource health. And this is going to show you health information and Microsoft issues that can affect particular resources. So for example, if we look at our virtual machines, I don't have many going now. It looks like I've just got one. A lot of Azure resources have a resource health option in their settings blade. Here it is down here. And so it's going to show over time you can report on any issues that Microsoft has had, for instance, communicating with your VM, your agent, your Azure agent, and that kind of stuff. Reminds me a little bit of the troubleshooters that have been part of Windows Client since probably Windows 95 or Windows 98, where they give you some recommended remediation steps. Again, you can download these issues as a PDF if you need to keep them in your corporate service desk or issue tracker and stuff like that. Any questions thus far about ways to stay current with Azure status and Microsoft side maintenance stuff?
Hey, Tim, this is Harley Dixon. I'm actually a student of the Microsoft Software and Systems Academy.
Great.
Quick question about the virtual machines and planned maintenance. How much redundancy does Microsoft have, and how often is planned maintenance going to be an issue?
Great question. It brings up the question of the shared responsibility model, where Microsoft on their side, they're responsible for high availability in their regions and in their service centers, or data centers rather. But you as a customer are responsible for high availability for your VM. So there's a couple ways that you can do high availability with your VMs. You can physically, well, I was going to say physically, you can clone the VM. Like if it's a web server, for instance, you can do high availability by deploying n number of replicas and putting them in different availability zones, which means that they get placed in different data centers in the same region. For regions that don't have availability zones, because not every region does, you can do something called an availability set. And that way, you're instructing Microsoft to put your replicas on separate servers and on separate racks. So even if there was a planned or unplanned outage of, say, an entire rack, you would still be online because you'd have another replica of your virtual machine Microsoft would make sure that it's on a separate rack, and the different racks have separate power lines and separate battery backups and separate network and all that kind of stuff. And there's a third option that if you're willing to use the premium storage, the high-speed solid-state disk storage, you can get, I think it's 99.95% high availability SLA for just a single instance of your virtual machines. So that's the kind of long-winded answer. You have to plan for high availability by using availability sets or availability zones. So that way you're not going to be affected so much if Microsoft has a planned or unplanned event. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that it can be just a stopping and restarting a VM that could move it to another host. You'll never know for sure, but let's imagine that this virtual machine was on a server in Microsoft's data center, and the server was called host 1. And I'm doing something on this VM inside it via RDP where I have to restart it. I restart it and I don't know, but in the background, Microsoft live migrated my machine to host 2. It can happen. That live migration can happen for any number of reasons beyond our control. And that movement, let's imagine, from host 1 to host 2, an hour later, let's say Microsoft had planned maintenance that would take down host 1. You're still available. You never know any different because you're on host 2. And the reason you're on host 2 is just because totally unrelated, you restarted or shut down and started up your VM again, and it got live migrated. So it's a different paradigm. This is what I like to tell people in my little tiny consulting practice, that how you do high availability on premises and local data centers, you have to look at it quite differently indeed in the cloud, because there's just so many more moving parts and there's so much that you'll never see by virtue of that. It's the cloud, it's Microsoft's infrastructure. Now, how about Azure product availability? To answer the question, how do you help stay on top of going into the portal and seeing new things every day and seeing preview this and preview that? Probably the chief resource for that to stay current is this, the Azure Updates page. And once again, you see the prominent RSS feed link. So I want to give you a strong suggestion to start to build an RSS feed list in whatever RSS reader you want. So what we have here is, in reverse chronological order, postings and updates from all of the Azure. I'm not going to say all, because some engineering teams are more engaged with the customers than others. I'll just say most of the Azure engineering teams. They'll post updates here as their products go through the life cycle. So the product would be in private, just internal development until it reaches a certain level of maturity. Then it'll normally go into a private preview where partners and selected customers may be able to opt in to work with that product while it's in private preview. Once you see the preview tag in the general portal, then you could know that that particular product is in public preview. A good example of that is Blueprints. That service has been in public preview for what seems like forever, to the point where the Microsoft certification exams will cover Blueprints now. And I actually asked them on a couple different occasions, why are you breaking your own rule? Your rule is the certification exams only cover generally available features, not preview ones. And their answer was, well, in the case of Blueprints, it's close enough to GA, close enough for horseshoes. But you and I know, I think, that you want to be careful about using public preview features in production, because the general guidance there is that there's no service level agreement and there's no support. There's some exceptions to that, but that's generally the case. Again, Microsoft always making changes. They changed the interface a bit here since the last time I came in. It looks like you can filter the announcements based on whether it's in private development and if a team has something to say about it, if it's in a private or public preview stage, or if it's generally available to the public. And if you're interested in a particular product like Azure Arc, let's just say, you could just do a free text search and you can see. This is actually a good way to get involved in a private preview, because you may be aware that Microsoft is developing such and so a feature or such and so a product that you know in your business you're going to really use and benefit from. And by looking in here, and a lot of times if there's a preview announcement like this, there'll be a link where you can opt in. And that's kind of a win-win because you get a chance to kick the tires on a service before it's generally available and you get a head start on it. And although you're not obligated to give Microsoft feedback, they're all ears. That's why they do these previews, so they can hear your feedback. And so you have the opportunity to give the engineering teams feedback that you want to see on the product that's going to help you in your business, you see. So that's the Azure updates. Let me see, there's Azure Blog. Again, the participation, you see, it's like any other huge company. I mean, what is there, 160 or something Azure products? So each one of those is a separate engineering team with their own product and project managers and software developers and testers. Some have a higher or lower priority in terms of evangelizing their product, but this is where, again, you can see announcements from these different product teams. And once again, you see the general theme here, RSS. It's not going to go away, at least it better not. Okay. Another stop on our trolley ride that is worth looking at is feedback.azure.com. This is the place where the Azure engineering teams, well, one place, where they collect suggestions for improvement, new product, new feature ideas. So the idea here is that if you have some feature request, let's say, that you think would be really useful for such and so a product, I would suggest that you come in here and you do a search first. You see there's two ways to search right at the top. It's kind of like Stack Overflow, where you want to look to see if other people have already raised your question or not. And the reason that's important is because these issues are voted on, as you can see here, and as people vote to agree with whatever the proposal that the customer makes is, the engineering teams get notified of this, and as the votes bubble up, eventually they can and do turn into backlog items for these teams. And in some cases, yes, the feature becomes implemented and so on and so forth. So this is an important place where you can add your voice to the discussion. And also I found that the feedback forum is useful as a sanity check. If you're seeing behavior in an Azure product that's just weird to you, this is a place to confirm your suspicion. Chances are somebody else feels the same way as you and they're asking about it. And because a lot of these issues are responded to directly by team members, let me see. This one, bad example, this one isn't, but many times team members actually respond in a conversational thread. You can learn some stuff that otherwise you didn't know that could be really helpful in your work with Azure. Questions, comments, concerns, curiosities? Hit me. Hit me with your best shot, as Pat Benatar sings. Not yet? Okay. I just stumbled across a couple of these sites a few months ago, and as I was compiling this list of how to stay current with Azure for you today, I was like, where the heck were those? It was one of those things where you knew you had a good site and then forgot where you put it, but I did find it, I'm grateful to report. I don't know who the author of these particular sites are, but they're super nice. This one is at azure-overview.com. And if nothing else, it's a nice historical record. What it shows you is service by service, separated by categories. You can see here, analytics, backup, compute. But service by service, you can see the current status. Now I'm trusting, I haven't dived deep into this page. I'm trusting that the author or authors are keeping it up to date. If not, I disclaim all risk. No, just kidding. I don't disclaim anything, but you can see the current status of the feature, and then, whoops, you can see the preview date, the date that it entered public preview, and then the date that it went generally available. That can be useful, I find, for historical purposes. Frankly, as a instructor, I like those dates because I can include them in my course as kind of a historical framework. But that's what this seems to show us here. And you can filter based on features that are currently in public preview. Ah, this is really nice. Cool. Or you could just say, show me generally available. Okay. Then there's Azure Heat Map, which is azurecharts.com. I think Mark Rusinovich, the CTO of Azure, posted about this one day, and it's how I learned about it. So it's saying it's a way to graphically show the content of the Azure Updates page. So the idea here, I wonder if Control F works. Let me look up Cosmos. Yeah, so Control F to find the product that you're interested in looking at. And then it clicks out to Azure Updates and it filters just on that product. So another way for you to search the Azure Updates besides these controls would be to just find the product here. This is kind of cool because it shows you numerically when you hover over a product, the updates over the last 6 months, the updates over the last 7 days, exactly when it was last updated, and then the last update information as a scrolling banner. Isn't that cool? That is really cool indeed. And that's live across all of these items. Also, I haven't gotten into this much, but you can see that there's a number of tabs here. Latest, more important updates, only last 7 days, so it can filter to bubble up to the top certain products based on its activity or its volatility. Interesting, interesting. Okay. As far as those newsletters I'd mentioned, the first one is by Mike Pfeiffer, if you know him, cloudskills.io. His is a hand-created, hand-curated weekly email newsletter, free. And really useful. His specialty is Azure DevOps and DevOps in general. And Mike's worked for both AWS and Microsoft, so he's got a lot of cross-cloud knowledge. If you know Chris Peachman, he has Build 5.9s. His is, I think he compiles it by hand. It's more verbose than Mike's. Mike's is more conversational and chatty. Chris's is more of a bullet list. And then I think they're a Azure consultancy engine. They've been publishing a weekly bulletin for many, many years, and theirs is super comprehensive. I suspect they use algorithms to generate theirs because it's just so complex. They probably scrape the Azure status page, the RSS page, and use that to feed into their weekly bulletin. So like I said, any of these three would be a great one to subscribe to. All three of them are free. And, you know, in terms of knowing what's latest, what's new. Number of community blogs that I like. A couple of them are particularly useful if you're a certification candidate. If you know who Pixel Robots is, that's Richard Hooper and Azure Greg from Scotland. Both of those guys publish study guides that are curated to each of the Azure exams. And Richard, the Pixel Robot, has updated his to the very latest generation Azure exams. And again, if you have any questions about the Azure certification, hit me. I'm very up to date with what's going on in that ecosystem. All right, as far as Azure skills development and staying current, well, I guess the first question would be just for you. Have you inventoried where your aptitude is? I like to say that when it comes to Azure, I mean, you may not have a choice. You may have your work cut out for you, so to speak, in your job role. But if you do have any flexibility, I like to look at it as weighing your aptitude with your interest and your passion toward whatever job role it is. I mean, because Azure, as you know, is a whole collection of different job roles. You know, you've got your systems and network administration. Those possibilities will probably take you down the path of compute products, the virtual machines and virtual networks and gateways and that kind of stuff. If you're an application developer of some sort or another, again, it's related to compute yet, stuff like app service and logic apps and function apps and all of the messaging and queuing products in Azure. If you're a data platform person, if you're a DBA, you know that Azure goes far beyond just their own SQL Server product family. You've got support for the Hadoop ecosystem, the big data analytics stuff with HD Insight and Apache Spark with Databricks, all of those kind of products. So like I said, what are you good at? Where do your skills lie naturally? And how do those coalesce with your interest and passion in that material? And so let me see if I can call out anything particularly here. Of course, I hope you have the Azure Docs bookmarked. What's really useful about the Azure documentation is that it's open source in GitHub, so you can contribute to it yourself, and they welcome those pull requests. The Azure Architecture Center, even if you're not an architect, let me zoom out a couple levels here. Hang on. Hello. There we go. Okay, good. Yeah, even if you're not an architect full-time, you can find some very useful resources here for your skills development and staying current with Azure. Specifically, what I've been focusing on a lot lately myself personally is under the reference architecture section. You're going to see a library of different architectures. Now, what's cool about these architectures, and you can see it right here on this first one I'm hovering over, many of them will include a Visio diagram as well as a GitHub project. So this is actually a live topology that you can edit and deploy yourself. So the idea here is that you can look through the reference architectures to find the closest match to the solution that you're designing. And if you need to create a topology diagram, it's a wonderful head start to get the Visio file that already has the diagram created, and it already has a lot of the shapes already in that. I've been gradually tiptoeing into Lucidchart territory. If you're familiar with Lucidchart, it's a browser-based software as a service drawing product, and they do support Visio for import and export. So it's not a proprietary thing where just because we're doing Azure, we have to use Visio. No, if you're using Lucid, you can import one of these Visio downloads, no problem at all. And like I said, not all, but some of these are live topologies. If I can find the GitHub link where you can go right, oh, here it is, deploy this solution. Eventually, I guess it'll take you out to GitHub. There it is right here. So that's a really running head start, it seems to me, if you're tasked with designing a solution in Azure. As far as skills development from a pure learning perspective goes, there I would encourage you to look at and inventory, how do you learn the best? Are you more of a visual learner? Can you learn with computer-based training when you're looking at videos and maybe following along with what the instructor's doing during a demo? Do you need live interaction with an instructor and or other peers, being able to ask questions and get answers immediately, getting focused, tailored support kind of stuff? Are you a book reader? Can you learn just reading and applying ebook or physical print book, whatever the case might be? So I would encourage you to spend some time during this quarantine to really clarify. I myself am a multi-learner, or what, I don't know what the official designation of that is, but fortunately I'm equally effective pretty much regardless of the form factor of the learning. So what you're seeing here, Pluralsight, Linux Academy, Cloud Academy, Skylines Academy, these are all companies I'm deeply familiar with and can vouch for all of their Azure training. And those are all subscription-based, software as a service, computer-based learning vendors. I will say that Pluralsight has a leg up in this space only because I'm a Pluralsight employee, have a partnership going with Microsoft. I'm trying to remember how you get to our free training. Let me see. Let me just do a search. Pluralsight Azure training and see if that takes us there. Yeah, Pluralsight plus Microsoft Azure. We've got, my gosh, I don't know how many hours of training that is completely free as part of our partnership with Microsoft. I'm pretty sure you have to have a Pluralsight user account, but it's not going to hit your credit card in any way, shape, or form. And we designed those courses according to the job roles that Microsoft uses for their role-based certification. So there's an administrator role, developer role, data platform, security, it goes on down the line from there. Now, one thing that's especially cool about Linux Academy and Cloud Academy is that they have hands-on labs. Pluralsight doesn't yet have hands-on labs. I'm a huge fan of Linux Academy because their computer-based courses do have a live sandbox environment that works great. It really does. And they've got labs for not just Azure, but also AWS and Google Cloud. And you know, it's one thing to pick up theoretical information, it's another to actually be working with the tech in a safe sandbox environment. You and I both know it's never a good idea to play with Azure in your business's production subscription, right? As far as free sandbox and self-paced learning goes, there's Microsoft Learn. If you go to docs.microsoft.com/learn, this is Microsoft's self-paced learning portal, and they have a whole bunch of learning paths. Let's click Browse All Paths. And what's beautiful here is, number one, you sign in with your Microsoft account so you can track your progress and then show that progress to your manager, to your boss. It makes a really nice way to document your professional development in the name of progressing in your current job or progressing in a future position. Number two, again, once you're signed in, you can browse all of these exercises, over 1,000 of them, by job role. So let's say you consider yourself primarily an Azure administrator. So we can filter these labs just by that job role until you find one that's particularly interesting. Microsoft's most popular path is this one here that I'm drawing a circle around, Azure Fundamentals. That one is excellent, not even necessarily for IT professionals. If anybody in your business, maybe a sales or a marketing person, needs a general understanding of Azure. They're not like you or I where we really want to stay on the cutting edge of what's happening inside of Azure, but needs more of a global, holistic understanding. That's a fantastic course, and it's really all you need to pass the AZ900 certification exam, which gives you the Azure Fundamentals badge. Now let me see here. I'm going to go into this lab randomly, and I'm going to try to find an exercise here, like this one here. Exercise, use the Azure portal. That's exactly what I wanted to see. Not every one of these exercises has the sandbox, but many of them do. And so what you can do here, it says, let's see, your Azure subscription will not be charged. We're going to be taken into the Azure portal, and it's not a simulation. It's the real Azure portal. Sure. Was there a question? No? Okay. And there's a terms of use here. You need to make sure that you're using the portal and Microsoft subscription just to work on the lab. If they catch you using it for other stuff, they could ban you from the sandbox. And there was a limit of how many sandboxes you can do per 24 hours. Maybe they lifted that restriction. But anyway, we can activate the sandbox. It takes a moment. We'll see an OAuth confirmation screen in a moment here where it says that based on your current account, I'm logged in with an Azure AD account. You could also just be using your Microsoft account. It's going to sign us in and just read our basic profile info. And if you're okay with that, we'll be taken into Microsoft subscription. And again, this is not a mock-up. It's not a simulation. It's the actual, honest-to-goodness Azure portal. And we're then free to go through the rest of the lab exercise. We'll see, I don't remember what the time limit is, 60 minutes or what the timeout is, but it's extraordinarily useful in terms of gaining that hands-on experience without any monetary cost. How can you beat that? While we're waiting for that, let me click this link for Azure Solution Explorer. This again is one of those Azure Charts family products. In fact, let me just give you as a homework assignment. If you go to azurecharts.com, spend some time clicking each link here across the top and just see what kind of fun stuff you can get into. In fact, there's a category I just noticed called fun. Azure Quiz, that's kind of fun. But anyway, this is the Solution Explorer. And what this does is it shows you graphically all of the different services. And when you select one, it maps to relevant docs articles. Isn't that cool? I mean, that could be another whole session we could do on how to stay current with Azure Docs. But this is nice because if you're studying, you're working on a solution that picks up, maybe Azure database for MySQL. You could just do a search in the docs, but it's nice that this is just kind of a filtered, curated list. Some don't have a lot of choices, it looks like, but anyway, that's the Azure Solution Explorer. Sandbox activated, time remaining. Wow, you get 4 hours in the Azure portal. And it tells us that we've used 1 of 10 sandboxes. That seems pretty generous. Okay, well, how do I open the portal here? Let me refresh and see if it's going to be in this same session. No, this is still my tenant. I wonder if it's a little bit confused because I was already logged into the portal in my tenant. I'm not sure what's up here. But anyway, that's Microsoft Learn, and that is the sandbox environment that's included in not all, but a good portion of those labs. And then lastly, the tail end here, again, particularly relevant when you're on quarantine and you have downtime at home, the idea of attaining a certification. Now, I know certifications are kind of, what's the term, controversial among some, because it is true, the old paper MCSE of somebody's hired onto your team who's got all these certifications, but you learn on the first day that his or her actual skills lag far, far behind what they have on paper. That's certainly a hazard. But actually, one thing that Microsoft Worldwide Learning has done to kind of try to work around that or limit that problem is these role-based certifications, which many of them involve a sandbox lab environment where in addition to answering multiple choice questions, you have to go into the Azure portal in your exam session and complete a number of practical tasks. And that seems to me that's a pretty darn accurate way to gauge whether somebody can do something. I mean, you might say, do you know how to create and configure a storage account during a job interview? And they say, yeah. And it's another to sit them down and say, okay, show me. Show me how you do it. So what we've got here over the last couple years is this trend toward, instead of product-based certifications, role-based certifications. I've already mentioned this before. So for example, for administrator certifications, if we drill down that particular path, we've got these badges. And something else that's kind of cool about these badges is that they're eminently shareable. Instead of like, you know how in the older days, when we went to and from the data center uphill in the snow and in the rain and all that good stuff, you'd earn your certification and you'd get your pass in the testing center and feel good, but then you'd wait a month or two to get your certificate that you'd frame and put on the wall. Now in this day of instant gratification, it's a much easier process. Let me show you what I mean. On my personal website, I've got some links to some of my badges. And so notice that you can put the images themselves on your website or on your social media, or if you have an online resume, but you can validate that you actually do have the cert. So for instance, Azure Developer Associate, let me click that. Microsoft partnered with a company called Acclaim. They're a digital credential company. And so what this is a public URL. It's an unauthenticated URL that I can share with anybody I need to verify that I've earned this badge. It tells them right up at the top that this badge was issued to me. And if I click my link, it's got my contact info and my profile info and that kind of stuff. When you earned the achievement, and then when it expires. These Azure role-based certifications have a 2-year expiration. Some people are coming up on the 2 years now, and Worldwide Learning hasn't made a formal announcement, but I can tell you, because I've talked to the head of Worldwide Learning not too long ago, they're planning a way to renew your Azure certs without necessarily having to take an exam, which hopefully makes you feel good and makes you feel more incentivized to spend the money, because these things aren't cheap. In US dollars, they're generally $165 an attempt. So what I would do is share this URL. It happens to me all the time as a trainer. A training organization might say, Tim, we have an opportunity for this Azure developer training, but the client requires that the instructor be certified. Are you? They're not going to take my word for it. I send them this URL, and functions kind of like SSL TLS digital certificate validation here. So this is saying Microsoft is standing behind this certification and a claim issued it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see down here, this can be useful for your career development. As you're updating your resume, these can give you some good keywords to add to your online resume, because these are the skills that Microsoft is associated with that badge. You see what I'm saying? Now, if none of you are interested in the certification stuff, let me shut up now. I want to make sure that our last 10, 15 minutes together are high impact for you. Questions, comments, what do you got for me? Bill, can you fill in the breach with a question if nobody else has one?
Yeah, I just had one thing to add. It's been pretty thorough presentation. One point that I always find useful is on any of those Microsoft Docs pages, there's a left-hand bar with a PDF that you can download with everything about that subject, not just that one page. I find that really useful if you want to go deep on a subject.
Good point. Yeah, let's spend a moment just deconstructing a typical Docs page. One, I'm going to start out, here's the PDF link that Bill is talking about. The only hazard I would have about the PDF link is that some of these documents, the more popular ones, are pretty volatile, kind of like Wikipedia. So understand that your PDF is only going to be as current as of when you generated it. But other than that, we can see right at the top the last time the Docs article was updated, an estimate of reading time, and then you can actually click in and see the contributors. Now, these may be Microsoft employees in their Docs organization, but this particular article has many contributors. And I'm from all around the world too, and these may or may not be Microsoft employees. You might think, well, how can you trust this? Well, if you were to come in here and find a mistake, or maybe you've got an idea for an example that you think would be really useful to the community, notice that the docs have this edit this document up here. The docs org at Microsoft is trying to make it as easy as possible for you to contribute. What I'd suggest you do is go to the Azure Docs repo at Git and read their contributor guidelines right here. Getting started, there's a contributor guidance doc that'll give you all the step-by-steps. But the long story short is you can clone or make a copy of whatever article it is that you're interested. Make your changes, put it back up into GitHub, and then submit a pull request, and who knows? Maybe Microsoft will accept your pull request. To answer the question, well, how does Microsoft avoid pollution? You know, like Wikipedia gets defaced every day, even though in most cases it gets corrected very quickly. Well, Microsoft has a bunch of automation built into their GitHub repositories. It'll do stuff like style checking and typo checking and all that kind of stuff, but it also looks for plagiarism. It's got a whole bunch of automation logic built into it, and that's before somebody at MS Docs will actually look at your change and actually validate it. So it's not like you can just, you know, say an introduction to and then delete Azure and put AWS or something, you know what I mean? Those are going to get caught. But besides helping the larger community by issuing changes like this to the MS Docs, I submit again, this could be a positive accent to your career, because every change that's made in GitHub is tracked and it comes back to your account. And so that's something, again, it's good to do in a yearly performance review. You can show I contributed to the Azure documentation base. You know, it's pretty darn cool, I think, that this is possible. And, you know, I sometimes am a little sarcastic in terms of saying, you know, products in Azure almost always seem to come directly from AWS. But I've noticed that the reverse has started to happen a bit, and that cross-pollination between the two companies is happening. For example, if you go into the AWS docs, like you just go to a representative AWS docs article, you can see they've now adopted a similar motif. They might have always had the PDF and, of course, Amazon Kindle option. But look here, edit this page on GitHub. I'm not sure when they did it, but now the AWS docs are also open source. So that means the community can contribute to those docs as well. It's really nice time to be in cloud computing. And actually, while you're on quarantine, I guess I'll put in a word for if you're not up to speed with Git version control and the GitHub flow, no matter what your job role, it seems to me that's going to help you being able to understand how that ecosystem works for sure.
Hey, Tim, I've got one more question.
Sure.
Tell us about your new book.
Oh, thanks. Sure thing. Yeah, and if any of you are interested in terms of community contribution, whether it's authoring a computer book or anything, hit me up. This has been my specialty for 21 years now. I'm an IT professional, that's right, and I love the tech, but my particular bent, my niche, is in education. I'm a teacher and I'm a writer. And if you find that people are able to understand you when you explain tech stuff to them, either in a written form or verbal form, it could be a really lucrative, satisfying career or kind of a side gig for you as well, for sure. But anyway, my latest book is Azure for Dummies for Wiley Publishing. And the book is personally very satisfying to me because when I started in IT in the mid-90s, I used a dummies book to help me pass my first technical interview. I was asked to present on mail merge, and I was, pretty young and wet behind the ears. I didn't even know what mail merge was. So I went to my local mall, local Walden Books, and got like Word 95 for Dummies. And my dad has been a Dummies fan, so personally the brand has been meaningful. So it's a realization of a dream to be able to write the book. But long story short, it's a general introduction to Microsoft Azure, and I've tried to make the book as evergreen as possible. I mean, everything we talked about over the last hour, the fact all these updates and all this procedure to get current, kind of goes up the chimney when you put it in a print book. So on one hand, I asked myself, why am I doing a print book when as soon as that book goes to press, you're locking in stuff that's going to change in the future? So I tried to be as evergreen as possible and make sure the reader knows right at the beginning to expect change. In fact, one of the appendices in the book is kind of what I've done here tonight. I give a list of resources on how to stay current in Azure. Now, how do you know if you're a good fit for the book? The book assumes no previous knowledge or work in Azure. If you do Azure work every day, I'm not sure how much benefit you'd get out of it, to be perfectly honest. But I tried to also spread the content across the different major job roles. It's not focusing exclusively on administration. There's a fair amount of development. I try to go across the major roles, like I said, so that there's something for proverbially anybody. And it's not that big of a book either as far as dummies goes, so it should be a pretty fast read. And I hope you like it, if you do decide to get it.
Hey, Tim or Bill, can I ask a quick question, kind of off topic?
Sure, go ahead.
Go for
Hey,
it.
I was just wondering on the tech, because you mentioned the training and stuff, and I'm trying to finish up the architect exam. But one of my questions, I'm noticing that they're saying that the testing centers that are view owned or because of the virus are closing down. Do you know if the Nashville centers are open, or because I know some belong to training centers and they belong to schools. I don't know if they belong view owned. But I was wondering if you heard anything of that locally, if the schools are open or not. So I was gonna start calling tomorrow and make sure. I just wonder if you knew something offhand.
Yeah, I haven't heard
Delay or-
anything, but I think you should
Okay.
check, definitely.
Well, here we go. I know in Nashville there's New Horizons and it looks like
Mhm.
they're closed. I've also taken exams on White Bridge Road, that Tennessee Technical College.
Yes.
That place. I'd almost guarantee they're closed. So that actually bears mentioning of this as an option. Online proctored delivery. This, you can take any of these Azure exams from your home on your computer. You use your phone. You'll need a phone because you'll be working with a live proctor.
Mhm.
The biggest tip I have for you here to save yourself a bunch of hassle is if you can do it on a laptop and literally go into a closet or go into an empty room, because you have to make sure that there's no distractions or no potential for exam security issues. In other words, if you have more than one monitor, they're going to make you unplug, turn off all of your other monitors. It can be really a big pain if you're trying to do this from your actual office desk. So go into a closet with a laptop where it's just you and a little tray table and your laptop and your clothes. And the proctor will have you scan the room with your cell phone to make sure that you've got, everything is in a row. And the other things to keep in mind with the online exams is that nobody can come in your room during the exam. So notify your family and pets to stay out of the room, because if somebody walks in, even accidentally, the proctor's going to invalidate the exam. And lastly, you can't even take a bio break during your exam, and the proctor gets kind of weird if you're looking around in all different directions. So you want to, it's pretty rigorous, but it's all in the name of exam security.
Okay.
Hope that's
Thank you, sir.
helpful. Sure, you're welcome.
Tim, quick question. I would fully, there's a lot of sketchy sites out there that, at least they appear to be sketchy, that offer exam questions and so forth. And those sketchy ones tend to be the more cost-effective ones.
Right.
One that you have listed here, the Whiz Labs, also seems rather cost-effective. So I assume it passes the smell test and gets the TIM seal of approval as far as the validity and quality of material.
Yes, indeed. I'll give you a very candid assessment of what's going on with practice exams. Let me see if they're still up. Cert Guard. Yeah, there's a company, they've been around for a long time, certguard.com. If you're ever wondering if a particular IT certification exam vendor is legit or if they're a pirate, run them in here. And that's what Cert Guard does. And as you can see here, they've got on the left their top 20 safe searches. So these are the major providers. Some of these are old. Train Signal no longer exists, for instance. But anyway, in the document that I made for you, what I recommend are, let me see, Measure Up and Whiz Labs are the top two. Measure Up is Microsoft's official practice test provider. Their downside is that they're kind of expensive. They're about $100. But the upside is that the exam engine looks a lot like what you'll see on the live exams. And they also include most of the different item types that you see on the exam, because these exams go far beyond multiple choice. There's case studies and all sorts of interactive item types, and you'll get that experience and get that practice with Measure Up, and that's a good thing. Lastly, the Measure Up explanations give you links to the documentation, and they actually teach you in addition to just drilling you on the questions. If Measure Up has a downside other than the premium price, it's that they tend to write their exams too early. They're under contract with Microsoft to have their practice exams ready day and date when Microsoft releases their exams. So Measure Up is forced to align their stuff with the beta versions of the exams. I know because I've written for Measure Up quite a bit over the years. And the downside to writing to beta items is that they can change. And so you can see some differences between what's on the Measure Up and what's on the live exam. And that's caused some customer complaints. But overall, excuse me, I recommend them. Whiz Labs, I don't yet have personal experience with. I've been meaning to buy one and kick the tires because I'm studying for the AZ400 Azure DevOps exam currently. But many of my students and colleagues and friends told me that their stuff is really good. It's really up to date. It's really accurate. It's not brain dump. It's a legitimate practice exam product. The downside I've heard to Whiz Labs is that I don't know if they're offshore or if they contract authors from offshore, but there can sometimes be some language glitchiness. You could tell that the items weren't written in English, but I've heard great stuff as far as their overall quality. The other thing to be potentially concerned with Whiz Labs is that they evidently don't have interactive items. It's just multiple choice. So you'll want to just be prepared if you've never taken a Microsoft Cert exam for the different item types besides just multiple choice. I have in my YouTube channel, I've done at least one video in there where I go over the different kinds of items that you can expect to see on the Azure exams, and I give you tips and tricks on how to do each one. So if my website is techtrainertim.com, and there's a link to the YouTube right here on the upper right of the icon list.
Thank you.
Sure, you're very welcome. And again, to repeat, if you look in the lower left corner of my monitor, you can grab this resource document that I made, how to get and remain current with Azure, at timw.info/current. It's just a markdown file in one of my repos. I think that's all I've got, Bill.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tim. Great job. Really
Thanks.
appreciate it. And I'd like to thank Microsoft Teams for supporting us by for giving us good reception and good.
They're holding up well. Better, dare I say, better experience than I've had with Zoom lately.
Yep. All right, so everyone, we'll see you next month. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you very much.
Good to be safe.
I know.
Appreciate it.